Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodities space to make you a better investor in the sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is April 18th, 2026. And disclaimer before we jump in, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And my guest today is the CEO of Cosa Resources, a Canadian uranium exploration company with a portfolio of multiple underexplored, 100% owned, and Cosa operated joint venture projects in the Athabasca Basin. Is Keith Bodnarchuk. Great to see you.
Great to be back, Jesse.
Well, it's been a while since we last chatted, so I'd love to kick things off with your current assessment of the uranium mining sector. From a sentiment perspective, it certainly seems more muted than a few years ago when we had uranium Twitter making a whole bunch of noise. We had a lot of excitement in the space. It feels like that's died down a little bit. Is that something you're sensing as well? And how do you see the sector performing for the remainder of the year?
I'd say it's actually been somewhat stable, especially in 2026. You've seen the price of uranium stabilize in that mid to high 80s for $80 per pound, and you're seeing a big period of consolidation here, which is a good thing, I would say. And it's really positioning itself for that next leg up, which I think we could see in 2026. So I don't know. I think it's in a strong position. We're positioned for that next leg up, and fundamentally, supply and demand side, like supply and demand side, fundamentals, it's as strong as it's ever been. And so, I think these muted periods where people think it's muted are healthy for a longer term bull market, and I think you're seeing more people start to pay attention to it. Longer term investors. You've seen small caps, even like COSA, where we've had positive news with drill results, and we've been rewarded in the market, even in such a volatile overall market. You've seen good stories get rewarded. So I think it is fundamentally very strong. These periods of consolidation are important for the health of a longer term bull market.
Yeah, some great thoughts. I want to talk about one thing that has been front and center with the equities. You mentioned volatility. And one thing that we've seen with uranium equities has been tremendous volatility with high single digit and even double digit percentage gains and then losses on the other side happening on a day by day basis. Now, of course, we all know that we're focused on the long term fundamentals of the sector here, and day to day price action is mostly just entertainment, but it does kind of serves to shake out a lot of retail investors who get scared off by that tremendous volatility. What do you make of this roller coaster price action, and do you expect it to normalize as this market cycle for uranium matures?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue the broader metals market has been volatile, especially over the past few months here, seeing big swings from day to day. But I think that just shows, for uranium's sake, that just goes to show that we're in the infancy of a long-term uranium bull market, and there's not enough of those long-term investors yet, which is a good sign. It's that you haven't missed this opportunity, and as things stabilize or normalize, as you said, and as more people start to realize what's happening in the uranium sector, you will see more of that sticky money start to enter into this space, and I think stabilize the prices of equities and everything else affecting uranium. So, I like it's early days. I think that just points to early days, and so I think that's a good sign. Obviously, it's painful from a day to day, and people that are looking to day trade something, you will have some pain with uranium equities. It has been a niche for a long time. Uranium equities, but I don't think it's going to be for very longer. And I think as it comes more to the forefront to be compared to other, commodities or other metals, copper, nickel, things like that, I think you're going to see uranium stabilize more. But it's just in the infancy of what's going to be an unprecedented bull market for uranium.
I completely agree with you. Now, the supply deficit is glaring. It's becoming more and more apparent. And now we've seen Cameco not only cut its 2025 McArthur River Key Lake production guidance from 18 million pounds to 14 to 15 million pounds, but a week ago, flooding in northern Saskatchewan forced a temporary halt at the Key Lake mill and reduced activity at McArthur River. How significant are these operational setbacks for Cameco, and how does this impact the already precarious uranium supply deficit globally?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call it a major setback for Cameco itself, but it just goes to show how tightly held, how tightly wound, and how susceptible to disruptions the uranium market is from a supply standpoint. And mining is difficult, and unfortunately, things like this do happen on the supply side of things. And any sort of setback with how how the current situation in the supply and demand part of the uranium market, any setback is meaningful because we're sitting in a global situation where the current supply cannot keep up with the current demand, and so these things add up fast. And so I think, from a Cameco standpoint, obviously they want to get that production going as fast as they can. But, it's interesting when that happened to them, you saw their stock price go up. And so that just tells me that people are starting to understand that how valuable this uranium is, and that, we need to really get going from a supply standpoint. And any little setback, for us to even come close to meeting demand, everything has to go perfectly, and that's just not how mining works. And so it could make for some interesting days ahead if you see any more blips on the supply side. You could see an upward jump in the uranium price any day.
Yeah, and I think Kazatomprom also bears continued watching. They have faced production woes largely around sulfuric acid shortages as well, and a lot of projects ramping into production, developers attempting to ramp into production, facing their own sets of issues. As we look into the rest of 2026 and into 2027, what do you think are the biggest potential catalysts? Supply discipline from producers, accelerating policy support, or something else entirely? The catalyst that you think could push the next leg up in this uranium bull cycle?
I think the world just keeps focusing on how much energy security matters. With what's happening in the Middle East, the reliance on oil and natural gas, isn't as stable as it once was. And so you're going to see different countries, different jurisdictions look to diversify, their sources of electricity, and that bodes well for nuclear, as being one of those other types of energy that people diversify to. And that bodes well for Canada, where COSA's projects are, because of its reliability as a producer of uranium. And I think as when the dust settles from this conflict in the Middle East, you're going to see countries really focus on securing uranium, amongst other things. And the U.S. really needs to ramp up securing their supply. China obviously is active in every commodity in securing their supply, and India is really the wild card of when they're going to start to look to bring in some more supply and secure some more supply for themselves. And so all that points to more demand, and this goes back to your previous question about the supply issues. And I think people aren't looking that far down to the mining level and starting to realize that there could be a supply issue very quickly. There's one arguably happening today. And so any of that stuff happens, that energy security, stuff like that, and people start to realize that, man, we need a lot more supply. It bodes well for the price of uranium. And it could make a very strategic uranium, a very strategic metal very quickly in the next, 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, your thoughts were echoed by Rick Rule, who was on the show recently, who said actually he thought uranium was going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of what was happening in the Strait of Hormuz, as political leaders realize, okay, we need a dense form of energy that we can store in our own jurisdiction and not have to rely on these fragile supply chains. So I think those were some great thoughts. I want to talk about how Cosa Resources fits into all of this. Why don't you give us an overview of your operations at present and outline your ultimate objectives in the uranium sector?
Yeah, so the Athabasca Basin is where COSA's projects are. It's in Saskatchewan, Canada. It's home to the highest grade and really best uranium mines in the world. And COSA is strategically positioned in that part of the world with great projects, a strategic collaboration with Denison Mines. And so we talked about it in the previous question that when people look for supply of uranium, there's only a couple of good stories that are currently in construction, and to try and meet some of that demand. And when you go down one step further to exploration, it's even more dire. We need to be finding the next great uranium mines yesterday. And COSA is well positioned with a team that's done it multiple times, through multiple companies that are now billion-dollar companies. We have a great land package, and we've had recent drill results that suggest we could be on to another great discovery. And so you're going to see the explorers really start to kind of take advantage of this next portion of the I'd say the uranium bull market. And COSA is going to play an important role. I think we have a great opportunity here to make a significant discovery and help supply that next leg of uranium in the next part of the bull market.
Well, I want to get into that collaboration with Denison Mines in just a moment, but first I want to dive into your wholly owned uranium projects. Could you give us some color there on milestones achieved so far, plans moving forward, and any details you think investors need to know about that portfolio of 100% owned assets?
Yeah, so I mean, it's no secret that the Athabasca Basin is home to the highest grade uranium resources in the world. You know, an average grade of uranium deposit outside that part of the world is about 0.2% uranium. The average grade of the Hurricane deposit that our team found in 2018 during our time at ISO Energy, the average grade of that is 34.5% uranium. So it's the most valuable rock on the planet. So there are hundreds of companies flocking to this area to try and find uranium. And you know, fortunately for us, we were a bit ahead of the curve, and we managed to piece together a terrific land package, you know, along what we call uranium corridors in the eastern side of the Athabasca Basin, which is home to the current mines and mills. And we did it in a cost-effective manner, so that we now have this strategic land package in really the most highly competitive area in the entire uranium space. And you know, over the past couple of years, we've been generating great targets on them. We've done some drilling campaigns, and you know, projects that we acquired for less than $100,000 Canadian. We've optioned off to other groups that are going to spend $10 million and give us about $5 million in cash and shares. So we've looked at value accretive opportunities for some of our projects that we weren't going to get to ourselves. And so this land is extremely valuable. We think we have a great pipeline of exploration targets on this ground to hopefully ultimately make one discovery, if not more. And so that's what excites us. And we are fortunate that we did piece together a lot of this land ahead of this race, and we're going to take full advantage of that.
Let's talk about your strategic collaboration with Denison Mines, because that's a new development that has occurred since the last time I had you on the show. Walk us through those details and what the plans are moving forward.
Yeah, so when I was talking about the 100% portfolio, I was talking about target generation and great targets. That's because our focus is on the three projects that we acquired from Denison Mines in early 2025. We acquired a 70% interest in three projects, and in return, Denison became our largest and most strategic shareholder at just under 20%. They've maintained a large shareholding in us through multiple financings. They've put two people on our board, and so it's really been a collaboration. And for us, we really view it as a win-win. From their standpoint, frankly, they saw this team that had been a part of, multiple discoveries that was sitting there in really a, relatively cheap company, 20 million market cap. And they said, let's pair up with them, and if they're able to make a discovery, we'll be along there at both, an asset level and a corporate level. And because, these discoveries are hard to make. So from their standpoint, it made a lot of sense. And from ours, having that, somebody with that quality or that pedigree of Denison as your largest shareholder. But also they had great projects that they weren't going to get to during this uranium cycle. The Murphy Lake North project, which is right beside Hurricane, the deposit that we found in 2018, the Darby project, which is right beside Cigar Lake. And, as simple as it sounds, the best place to be looking for uranium is beside uranium. So these are great assets in an area of the Athabasca Basin that's highly competitive. And so this was a huge, really a turning point for us as a company to get Denison on our share registry, to have them as a collaborator at both the technical and corporate level. And so this was a big transaction for us. And Murphy Lake North and Darby have become our focus for projects that we are actively drilling.
Well, that's a great segue into discussing your drill results. You've announced some exciting drill results from those joint venture projects, including a press release you put out around 10 days ago on the Darby joint venture, along with other results earlier in the year from Murphy Lake. Could you highlight those findings and how you plan to use them to advance those projects?
Yes, certainly. So we had our most significant drill result to date as a company in March of this year, where we intersected 5 meters of radioactivity, elevated radioactivity at our Murphy Lake North project. Reminder that obviously uranium is radioactive. And so when we have initial results, we can stick what we call a scintillometer onto the drill core and show that it is radioactive. And so this was a huge result. You saw our share price react accordingly. And, the radioactivity itself is impressive. But when you factor in, what's happening in and around it, the fact that, geologically, we have this huge alteration halo, huge structurally disrupted area. The fact that, this project is within, 3 kilometers of the hurricane deposit, and it's also very shallow, where it's, 250 meters down to the target depth, which is very shallow in the Athabasca Basin. And finally, it's wide open in both directions. We drilled those few holes, and we had to stop drilling for spring breakup. And so we'll be back to follow those results up, as fast as we can. But that was a significant result for us. And, when we discovered, when the team of COSA discovered Hurricane, in 2018, they had an initial result that was, 8 meters of 1% uranium. They followed up in subsequent programs, and that's where they defined, the 50 million pounds at average grade of 34.5% uranium. And so, it looks like we could be on the edge of a much larger system here, which is a significant result. And we could be, on to that next great discovery. And we'll be back there drilling as fast as we can. And that's in June of this year. And on the Darby side, we had great results there too. That's the one where it hadn't been drilled, in almost 15 years. We went and started drilling this Charlie trend and Gamma trend, Charlie trend being right next to Cigar Lake. And we're seeing, bits of uranium kind of everywhere, which suggests that there's a large source somewhere nearby. We just maybe haven't found that great sweet spot yet. And so we'll be back there also, later this year, hopefully to follow up those great results. And so I think when I set up this, when we set up this company, the message, when I spoke to you last time, was team. We have this great team that's made multiple discoveries, and that's very important with an exploration company. And then we did the Denison transaction. All of a sudden, we're a team with strategic backers, having that relationship with Denison. And now finally, the next box that you want to tick as a company is, drill results. And now we have that. And that's why you've seen the next leg up in our value as a company. And so it's extremely exciting for us to be able to go and follow these results. And, hopefully we can grow this into something special like we did during our time at ISO Energy.
Is there anything we haven't yet covered, or anything that you think it's particularly important to emphasize that potential shareholders of Cosa Resources should be focused on?
Just that, we're going to be drilling here in June with our fully funded program. And we could be a much different company in a few months after this drill starts turning, because we have intersected radioactivity and we will be following it up. And for a company like us, even like I said, in this somewhat volatile market, we've been rewarded with that initial drill result. And if we're able to build on that, we'll be rewarded again. And we could be a much different company in a few months when I hopefully get to chat to you again, saying that, we're on to that next significant uranium discovery. And so very excited for us. Obviously the fundamentals in the uranium market, that helps. I've been a part of multiple discoveries. I've never timed a uranium boom with these discoveries. So it'd be nice if we can have that drill result time when there's an actual uranium boom and see what happens. We're in great shape, and we're going to be drilling as much as we can over the next few months.
Well, I'm going to put links in the description below to the Cosa Resources website as well as social media so people can follow along with the company. Keith, great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jesse.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.